Al always says, like, we made the first, like, white guy, Chinese guy buddy movie without kung fu in it. You know, he's like very proud of it. Like, I can't think of another one. He's like, Shanghai Noon is like the closest thing to this, and that's like
Yeah.
full of kung fu.
Hey folks, Brian Smith here with Dream Path Podcast, where we get inside the heads of talented creatives from all over the world. Today we talk to Carson Mell. There's been a little bit of a build-up to this interview because over the last two interviews, I've talked to Olivia Taylor Dudley and also Al D., both of whom were featured in the film Some of Our Stallions. And Carson Mell, if you've been listening to those previous episodes, Carson wrote, directed, and acted in Some of Our Stallions. So he really is responsible for putting this whole thing together. And what a talented guy Carson is. He was a writer on the show Silicon Valley on HBO, and that was created by Mike Judge. Carson also wrote for Eastbound and Down, one of my all-time favorite HBO comedy series with Danny McBride. He created an animated series with Danny McBride called Tarantula. So Carson is not only a writer, a director, and an actor, but he's also an animator. He's also written books. And this guy can do it all artistically. And for those of you who have not heard the previous interviews with Olivia and Al, I'll recap some of what you need to know about Some of Our Stallions. Some of Our Stallions is one of the better movies I've seen in 2021. It is a buddy movie about two guys who are struggling with mental illness, and they are on a quest to find love and friendship, romantic love, and they have some challenges because of their mental health issues. And comedy ensues when they go on a series of misadventures. They meet up with Olivia, and I don't want to give away too much, but this is a really fun movie, but it's also really dark too. And it goes into some areas that you're just not expecting with this type of film. It's an indie film, but it was executive produced by Mike Judge. So it has his stamp of approval, which is huge in a movie like this. He also, Mike acts, he has a role in this film. It's a small one, but it's an important one. And I just really enjoyed Some of Our Stallions. So it's really fun for me to do a deep dive on a film like Some of Our Stallions, where it's not just one interview, but you're talking to someone like Al D., for example, who was a producer on the film and an actor, and also Olivia Taylor Dudley, who had some star power coming into this film. And so attaching her to the project was important for reasons that you'll learn about when you listen to those interviews with Olivia and Carson and Al. But anyway, without further ado, let's jump into my chat with the immensely talented and humble Carson Mell. Carson Mell, welcome to Dream Path Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you look really different from the movie Some of Our Stallions. You're not as hairy. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I have a lot to talk to you about because I just finished. Of course, I watched Some of Our Stallions, and that's what we're here to talk about primarily. But I also watched The Long Dumb Road.
Oh, cool!
Just to get a sense of a little more of your writing style, and I know your Silicon Valley writing and that type of thing. But I was really impressed with that film, and it's remarkable to me how many movies are out there that just completely take me by surprise that I've never heard of before. And I don't know if it's just because I'm just like out of touch, out of tune with what's going on, or is there's just too much content. But this was a great road movie.
Oh, good! I'm so glad you dug it. Yeah, there's a lot of content now, isn't there? It's sort of. And even, I'm reading my friend's book right now. My friend Matthew Spector has this book that just came out called Always Crashing in the Same Car, and it's about his kind of deep dives into 70s cinema. And I'm finding out there's stuff back then that it sounds like literally made for me that I'd never heard of, but his, like, there's a Western, Monty Hellman did a Western, I think he directed it, called The Shooting, with Jack Nicholson and Warren Oates.
What?
And I'm obsessed with Warren Oates. I'd never heard of it. Yeah. So I'm now I got to track down a copy of that.
Yeah. I think you could probably spend the rest of your life just looking at prior content and not focus on anything within the last decade or beyond and still not get through it
Yeah.
all the great, iconic movies out there. But The Long Dumb Road, that cast, and we'll get to Some of Our Stallions here in a minute, but that cast I found to be really impressive in terms of like the cameos, like Annie Letterman was in there, and Livingston, and of course, Mantzoukas, and just this really great comedic cast. Were you part of that process as a writer and in attaching some of that talent, or were you just sticking in your lane of writer?
On that movie, I was sticking in my lane because my friend Hannah and I we wrote the movie on spec, and when we were writing it, I think there was going to be some involvement for me at that stage, but it happened at the same time that I was making my animated television show Tarantula, which was, more than a 9 to 5. So I was so focused on that that was the only thing I was doing while I was doing that.
The road movie genre, is that something that you connect with personally? Is it an easier genre to tackle on spec? Why did you choose a road film for this project?
It was actually it was based on a true story of our friend who picked up a hitchhiker. Our friend Nat Sanders picked up a hitchhiker and had a weird long road trip with him. So it kind of organically became a road movie. But then I'm a big fan of the 80s road movies. I'm forgetting the writer's name. You probably will remember, who did like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles and Dutch. And there might be another road movie in the bunch I'm forgetting, but those two especially I really liked as a kid.
Yeah.
So I love I like the shape of it. And they all kind of have this, so many movies have the same or like a standard sort of shape. But I feel like rom-coms and road movies like really have the same shape, where you got to like lose the vehicle and things have to just, get worse and worse and worse.
Right. And then there's the barroom fight and, running away from the melee. And yeah, it has those elements, but it also has a very unique, blueprint that makes it pretty fun.
Whatever vessel you're filling in, it's all about finding, story for the most part, has beginning, middle, end, and there's always some kind of resolution, or not always, but usually. So I feel like it's whatever colors you're using to fill in the story. It will always give something its flair or lack thereof, So.
Yeah. So when you say you wrote it on spec, I know what that means, but for my listeners, what is writing something on spec? What does that mean?
Well, it's short for speculative or speculation. Essentially, you just write a script hoping that someone will finance it and you'll get to make it, versus the more traditional studio route of coming up with an idea, pitching the idea, getting paid to write the script, and then making the movie. So it's how you break in, and it's how maybe not most produced, but most scripts are written that way, because you have to do a few spec to learn how to write. I know very, very few people who've been paid to write everything they've written. I do know a few lucky people like that, but very few.
Mm-hmm. So obviously the most ideal situation is a studio or some financing, person pays you in advance. So you're going to get paid, that it's likely to be made. But when you're writing on spec, there's just a lot of unknowns and a lot of moving parts. And what are the stats on spec scripts? I would imagine it's pretty pretty dark, pretty ominous for writers.
Oh, like what percentage is produced?
Yeah.
I don't know. Personally, I could say maybe like 5% of mine have been. No, actually, it's higher now that I've had a few movies produced. I've probably written I'm trying to think like complete, because if you count things that don't, I would say very few get produced, 3%. But I don't even know if it's much higher for scripts that are purchased,
Yeah.
Very few scripts get made in general. In fact, the friend I'm thinking of who has been paid to do all of his writing, I don't think he's had a produced script. So it's a good question. I don't know if there's anyone out. You might be the person to crack it if you keep asking your writer guests,
right,
what that metric.
I was talking to Jeffrey Paul King on the podcast recently, and I think he had it was like a Writers Guild stat or something like that. He said that basically, if you want to be a television writer, like there's more people that make it into professional baseball every year than make it into TV writing. So,
yeah, in fact, they tell you that at the WGA coronation or what have you, your first meeting, they tell you that stat so you can tell your parents.
Yeah.
So this was harder than baseball.
Make them feel a little bit better about their child's life choices. And
I will say there's probably a lot more people who want to play baseball, though, right? Than people who want to be writers. I don't know.
Probably. Yeah, a lot more people are. I would imagine there's a lot of aspiring writers too that just never take that. For me, anyway, writing seems to be more of a black box, or to put it more specifically, Hollywood and television writing seems to be more of a black box in terms of what goes on behind the scenes, what happens in the writer's room, how do you get into the writer's room. And that's why I really enjoyed hearing from Jeffrey Paul King, who he was on Elementary, or he was the writer and producer on Elementary for 7 seasons, and has this new show out on the CW called The Republic of Sarah. But he talked about, starting basically as an intern at a talent agency and, just starting from the bottom, basically making coffee and tea for people. But the whole trajectory and blueprint of how you get into your business, Carson, is something that a code that I've been trying to crack through these interviews for the last couple of years. And it seems to be a function of like really, really, really hard work, some degree of luck, and of course talent, but very, very difficult to get in and stay in.
I came out here from Arizona, and I had family. One of my uncles had worked at NBC as a cameraman for a while, like a camera operator. But other than that, I didn't really have. I had very, very few connections, and I think, as a criticism of myself in my 20s, I don't think I was very curious enough to figure it out. Excuse me. I didn't realize that there was kind of a more traditional path into a writer's room, like that involved, like the things you're talking about, becoming an assistant, going from intern to PA to writer's assistant, and then being in a writer's room. I didn't know that was a path even. And I didn't realize that until I was in a writer's room, that was a path. I was like, oh, that might've been faster than the one I took, which when I was in Arizona, I took a screenwriting class, and the teacher, who was a reader out in Hollywood, she just read scripts and wrote coverage on them. She basically said, like, if you move out to LA with no connections, expect it to take you 10 years to get a job. And that's almost to the day about how long it took me to get staffed on a TV show. So yeah, and then since then I met with some of the screenwriting students back in Arizona who were out here for some reason. I forget why they were out here in a group, but we all had lunch together because I wanted to kind of tell them how I see is the best way to crack in. And I would say the thing that I see work the most is if you can entertain someone with something you've made versus show them your writing, that's the way to crack in. So what I mean is, like, for me, it was my cartoons that I made. They saw them at HBO, excuse me, and they also read a novella I wrote, and that was kind of what led me into their world. So it actually wasn't with a screenplay. I don't think anyone who has hired me has read anything I've done. They've just watched my cartoons, because it's like, at the end of the day, you're presented, you're hiring writers, and someone sends you a YouTube link and a script. Well, script is like, even good scripts aren't fun to read. It's an inherently clumsy. It's like trying to read a recipe and decide if the cake's going to taste good, right, versus like if someone can just give you the slice of cake, you're like, oh, I would hire this person to write recipes. I like this cake,
Nice.
So that's my advice, is to try to create something finished and entertaining that you can send out. But whether it be even a short story, I think would be a good way in,
Yeah. Something that's a little more accessible.
Mm-hmm. But then you do need to know screenplay format once you're in that writer's room. So I guess I was lucky in that I'd written so many spec scripts that I was not intimidated by the form,
Mm-hmm. So tell us about the writer's room on Silicon Valley and what that was like, and in working with all of that amazing talent, just knowing that you have these actors that are just iconic comedic actors who are executing the ideas and the words that you're putting on paper.
I mean, it was a good feeling to know that your hard work would be interpreted well by the actors, and then shepherded by very hardworking people with good taste. Mike Judge and Alec Berg, who ran the room. You obviously can trust them to pick the best bits and use the best bits of things. And I think the actors felt that way too, and they felt comfortable, maybe too comfortable sometimes, improving and knowing that they weren't going to be made to look goofy by by Mike and Alec, who are overseeing the edits. They knew they could take it to 11 and experiment, but know that only those best pieces would make it into the cut.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Did you find yourself connecting with Mike Judge on the level that, you're both animators and maybe you have that in common? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in my interview, I think that's all I talked about with him, was that that great feeling of like, there is actually a way to make a movie by myself for very, very little money. And that kind of being freeing, that if you do want to express yourself with film, there is that version where you don't wait for a budget, you don't wait for money, you just draw it all.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And we're both from the Southwest. So and weirdly, there's not a ton of people from like New Mexico and Arizona in LA. I don't know why. But so we connected over just our regional, having the same kind of regional background,
Yeah. I didn't know Mike was from New Mexico. Is that his home?
He was raised there. Yeah.
He was raised in New Mexico.
I think he lived in Texas for a while too, but mostly New Mexico, Albuquerque.
Yeah. I know where he lives now because he was neighbors with my friend in Santa Monica. I was just down there a couple years ago, jogging by his house.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. But so Mike Judge, I would imagine that having him connected to your project with Some of Our Stallions was important and helped in some way to get the word out and get financing. Can you tell us about attaching him to the project and how you convinced him?
Yeah. It was funny. I was kind of shy about reaching out to him. It's one of those things where, like, when people you've worked with have become friends, you don't want to put them in an awkward position, because I value friendship so much more than anything professional, that I would never want those things to get in the way. So I was pretty shy about even though I really wanted his counsel on the script and other aspects, I was shy about approaching him. But then my producer Al D, who's also in the movie, he just said, "Well, just write him an email. He can just say no, and it's not rude. You've worked for him, and he likes your sense of humor." So I sent Mike the script, and he just thought it was really funny, and so he said, "Yeah, I totally want to be a part of this," and helped us with everything, with casting, with getting line producers in Canada, and then also he's in the movie and he did a great job. So that was really cool too.
In your email, did you tell him that you wanted him to be the gun dealer?
No, that came later. Yeah. It was like he signed on to EP it, and then I was looking at like other parts, and there's not like the movie's so heavy on Beautiful Bill and Andy. All the other parts are kind of small, but that was one of the bigger ones that I knew we could have fun with together. So I was really glad that he signed up to do it. He flew himself up to Canada and everything. He's Mike's a total trooper. He's really he's still really like down to make stuff and is excited about movies, which is really cool. That gets burned out of a lot of people in LA, I think.
Yeah. Well, he could have, at his level, he could have insisted on shooting that scene in LA. Just say, let's, get a hotel room and just knock it out and not fly up there. But that's good commitment on his part.
Yeah, Mike's not a prima donna. And I think they really held him up at customs too. He was like, so he had to deal with some bullshit to get up there.
It's funny, his line in that movie, the one line that sticks out in that hotel room is, "You need to get the fuck out of here." And I was like, that's probably not the first time he's said that to somebody. You need to get the fuck out of here.
It's true. Yeah.
Kind of rolled off his tongue. Right? Comes naturally.
Yeah.
So tell, I talked to Olivia yesterday and I talked to Al this morning. So this is going to be fun to roll out 3 episodes talking about this movie. So I have their perspective on how things came together, but tell us, in your words, how this script came to fruition as a film, and when it started in terms of the writing process, and what your thoughts were about how to put together the cast.
Really, the movie. Well, so there's kind of a long story about how the script happened, it was built off the back of kind of a huge disappointment and a huge failure. So long story short, or actually I'll tell the short story long. I'd written this movie called From Golden Oaks, and this was before I'd had any professional writing jobs. It was one of my many, many spec scripts. And I wrote that script in 2010. And it was about this character named Clark, who was released from a mental institution after a violent outburst. And he was trying to get back with his wife, and she didn't really want anything to do with him. And he kept running into friends and peers, and they were all acting very strange. So this character decides, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll throw a big party. And that way I can get everybody together in one place. They can see that I'm sane and healthy and happy. And I can kind of have like this coming out, or this return to the world of the sane. Well, throwing a party, for anyone who's ever done it, is super stressful. So it's like watching the kind of stress of this character who's grappling with his own mental stability, try to put together and throw a party. That's what the movie was all about. And it took place like Acts 2 and 3 were all at the party. And in that script were these antagonists named Beautiful Bill and Andy, who had just gotten out of the same mental institution. And they knew Clark from the inside. He'd foiled one of their escape attempts, and they wanted basically revenge on him for being happy and healthy, even though he was struggling too. So they go to the party and try to ruin it. Well, long story short, or I'm going to keep saying that, but what happened next was that script just kind of sat around my apartment forever. But then my favorite comedic actor at the time, whose name I won't use because I want to like respect their anonymity, he got a hold of the script. I'm just going to call him Jack Nicholson. It was not Jack Nicholson. It wouldn't have even have made sense with someone his age, but let's say, so Jack Nicholson gets a hold of the script. It was the person who got it was like a bankable actor who I like as much as Jack Nicholson. And he was like, hey, I really like this movie. Like, I would like to play Clark. And this was happening to me, someone completely on the outside of Hollywood. I was like, oh my God, like, this is like my dream come true. Like, my favorite actor wants to make this movie with me. Like, I couldn't even believe it. And I was so over the moon. And we had a few clumsy sort of meetings because I was figuring it out. It would be my first movie. I was very intimidated, etc. But still, it felt like things were on track to actually happen. And then I went to see a movie to relax one weekend, and the trailer for that movie, Silver Linings Playbook, came up. And it was the exact same premise. It was really, I felt like I was watching a trailer for my own movie with like a bunch of dancing stuff thrown in. And I was just like, my stomach sunk, and I was like, no, it's fine. People make similar movies all the time. But then Monday comes around, I get an email from Jack Nicholson where he's like, hey, I saw the trailer for Silver Linings Playbook. I feel like it's probably too similar to our idea or to your script. Let's like find something else to work on down the line, which means like, you know, who knows if that'll ever happen.
Yeah. Devastating.
So yeah, it was devastating, and it all went away. And then I started to think like, you know, the thing I liked most about this script was not the Clark character, even though I think Jack Nicholson, you know, would have made it awesome. The thing I liked the most was Beautiful Bill and Andy. I was cracking up every time I wrote their scenes. I had the donut with the cigarette in it from the beginning. And so I was like, I'm just going to write a script about them. And so I don't remember how long it took or anything like that, because this was like 2012. And I just sat down, drank a ton of coffee, wrote the script, printed it out, drew, you know, made a bunch of notes on it with red pen. And then I put it in a drawer and kind of forgot about it. And then I was cleaning my apartment out maybe like in 2016, 17. And I found the script and read it and was like surprised by it because I barely remembered writing it. And I really liked it. And I was like, man, I think I can make this. It's not that complicated. It's like written for a pretty, modest budget. I think I could make this. So, and then I got really excited about it, but nothing happened. And then meanwhile, there was another script I wrote called The Living Man that was about it's kind of like a Frankenstein road movie. And I was trying to get financing for that. But again, I was put into this position where to get the money I needed, I would need a big star to read the script like this script, commit to being in it. And it just wasn't happening. But the producer I met through that was Al D, a.k.a. Andy in the movie.
Yeah.
And then he said, you know, I can finance something without a big star for a more modest budget if you have anything like that's smaller in scale than this movie. He's like, we could just act in it even. He's like, I've done acting with my friends. I want to do more. I know you've done a lot of acting. Do you have anything? And then I sent him the script. He loved it, which was awesome. And then I did some rewriting of it, and that was it. We were off to the races. He introduced me to Olivia, who he thought would be a good Bonnie, and I agreed. And then we cast everybody else. I cast David Zellner just because he's my friend, and I thought he'd be right for the role. Mm-hmm. And everybody else, other than Mike and Tim Heidecker, who were people I knew through work and really liked, everyone else came through traditional casting in Canada. I think that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, a lot to unpack there. David Zellner played Sam, right?
Quite a story. What?
David Zellner played Sam, right?
He did. He plays Sam at the end of the movie. That's correct.
And that scene where he shows up with the alcohol, and I'm not going to give too much away here, but there's a scene that is just outstanding in terms of the facial expressions, how subtle his performance is there when he's interacting with Beautiful Bill and Andy, and his, I mean, you can see so much happening with, these close-ups on his face. And that's the part of the movie that I was talking to Olivia about this, the juxtaposition between the comedy elements and just how freaking dark this movie gets. It's a wild ride. And
Oh,
that,
cool.
that last scene was just super intense with Sam's character.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I wanted to make sure. I mean, you need to believe that Beautiful Bill is capable of some extreme violence for that scene to have tension. I think we earned it.
Yeah, I think you did too. I mean, Beautiful Bill. One thing that I was telling Olivia this. I used to work in a psychiatric hospital, so I have personal experience with a lot of psychiatric patients, and the sort of the manic parts of that behavior, and the over the top nature of some types of mental illness, where you can have someone who's just extremely charismatic and articulate, and then and as a result, like sort of a magnetic personality. You're like, wow, this is a lot of fun. We're going on an adventure, but then there's a point where you're like, okay, you start to get a little scared. Like this guy,
Yeah, for sure.
this guy
For
is
sure.
like a little too intense and isn't socially appropriate and unpredictable. And I think you pulled that off
Yeah.
with your character really well.
Oh, thanks a lot. That's nice to hear. Yeah, I feel like intuition and intelligence and mental illness kind of all ride in tandem together.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of mentally ill people are super smart and also very intuitive. And, like he does, like whether or not it's a coincidence, like he does dream the future essentially in this movie.
Yeah.
Beautiful Bill does. So
right.
he does have his feelers out more than other people, I think. Which, that's quite a bit based on family members of my own that I've seen struggle with this kind of stuff. And yeah, I'm glad to hear it came across as true, feeling true to you.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. Another thing that you get a sense of is Beautiful Bill is really hypersensitive to loyalty and connections. And so when he senses a connection slipping away, he acts on it like right away. And it's like, it's kind of jarring, when he feels like, he has that sit down with Bonnie about, laying down the law, basically. All right, so you guys are, this is how it's going to be. You're going to be my mom. And we're basically going to all be married. So that was pretty
sad.
funny.
He doesn't understand the dynamic that's likely unfolding. I think that's where a more sane person would understand sort of the rules of society and what's likely to happen. I think that's what makes him kind of likable, is the assumption that they can all be a trio and a family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a great film. So tell me about your approach to Andy's character when he was a character in the prior screenplay that was similar to Silver Linings. Was he an immigrant, and did he have an accent, and was that written specifically for Al, or how did that evolve?
That was he was just I hadn't like thought of. I was thinking more of his demeanor than anything like his race or anything. I didn't have that like pinned down, but he definitely wasn't a Chinese immigrant. That came with Al, and that actually aspect of it made me really excited, because it seemed really fresh, and then it also sort of like felt to me like Al always says, like, we made the first like white guy Chinese guy buddy movie without kung fu in it. He's like very proud of it. Like, I can't think of another one. He's like, Shanghai Noon is like the closest thing to this, and that's like full of kung fu. And I'm like,
that's
you're
so
right.
true.
Yeah. And it also just speaks to how incredibly conservative Hollywood is. Like, I don't think anyone, like, for all the talk of diversity, I don't think anyone but an indie filmmaker would cast Al D. You know what I mean? Like, they'd get nervous and they'd have like, I can't put it in an email, but I am worried the accent's a little thick. And then the other the producer, was like, yeah, I'm a little worried too. Let's not put in an email, but I'm a little concerned. It's hard to. But I was like, I don't care. I mean, like, I like that you can't hear every word he says. I like that it's like sometimes the emotion of what he's saying comes across.
Uh-huh.
And you get enough of it, which is like very much the actual experience of talking to someone who's English, someone who's not a speaker. And I like that about it, So.
Yeah. What I appreciated about it, and I mentioned this with Olivia, is that, and I think Al's commentary about there's no kung fu, or this is the first buddy movie with a Chinese immigrant where there's no kung fu. But the way I saw it was the movie does not comment on, reflect on, pay attention to, or care about the fact that he's an immigrant and that he has an accent. And I love that about the film. I love it because it's like when you see little people in movies, or dwarves, where there's always something. There's always some type of dialogue that is conscious of that and points to that,
Mm-hmm.
and makes fun of that in some way. And it's like, we need that. We need to have comedy, so let's bring in a little person. Or
yeah, that's the worst, right? I can't even believe. I remember, like, as a teenager, seeing those movies and like it not making me mad. But then as soon as I grew up, I was like, there's adults making movies like this with these jokes in them. Like, who the fuck sorry for cursing. What is wrong with these people? Like, anyway, it's just such an incredible, it's so foolish that I just can't believe that adults would make those jokes,
Well,
and again, I put that in air quotes, jokes.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're the whole sensibility of this film. The same thing with Bonnie, Olivia's character. She comes into this film very quickly and could have been sexualized very easily by another director, another producer. Like, hey, we have this, beautiful actress. What are you doing? Why are you not taking advantage of this opportunity to sexualize her like we do in Hollywood? And it's like, again, there's a relationship there, there's romance, there are sexual undertones, but it's not featured. It's behind the scenes. And that's another refreshing aspect of this movie. And I think if I'm seeing your filmography correctly and your writing style correctly, I think this is all you. I mean, this is just your sensibility in the world and is a reflection of how you see the world, or how you at least want to see the world. I don't know if that's accurate.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. I like, because they're very good friends, you know what I mean? So it's like the fact that that Aldi, or I'm sorry, that Andy is Chinese is like, it's just so does not, like, in any friendship, it's like just not even a factor. Like, what would beautiful Bill care?
Right.
It's like, I think there's a couple times where he acknowledges it, and when they're in a fight, he criticizes his English. But that actually came out of an improv that Aldi and I, when we were rehearsing, he said something that didn't make sense in English, and I just in character said that to him, angrily. And he was like, "Oh, we have to put that in the movie. We have to put this in the script," But yeah, the times where it comes up, it should be utterly organic, right? Like, right. If it comes up, you don't say, "Oh no, we can't go there," but you don't go there to go there, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. The commentary, or the observation I have about your prior film, the Long Dumb Road, or it's called The Long Dumb Road.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
yeah, Long Dumb Road.
The parallel that I see there too in your writing sensibility is that there are, again, your characters are just very respectful of women. And, a road trip movie, you just wouldn't expect that. The tropes of road trip movies, it's more raunchy, and where, the main protagonist in the movie is sitting there in about to take a picture of this young girl, and he asks how old she is, and then realizes pretty quickly, bad idea. I'm not going to take this picture. But it's it's just a really refreshing perspective on writing and film and television. And so,
for Long Dumb Road, I think I have to give. Oh yeah, I think for Long Dumb Road, I have to give the credit to the director Hannah for that scene in particular, because I think she came up with that on the spot.
Yeah.
It was really funny though.
In terms of everything that you have on your plate and your skill set, I mean, you're a television writer, you're an animator, you're an indie filmmaker. Where do you see your career going next, or where do you want it to go, so that you are, I guess, at your highest and best use? And that's a term that I use because, I think when people are capable of a lot of things, really talented at, 5 or 10 different things, that doesn't mean that that's where they should be doing those 5 or 10 things. Like, what is your highest and best use now and over the course of maybe the next 5 years?
Well, I have a 1-year-old daughter now, so I'm sort of following the money, to be honest. I'm a gun for hire for a while.
The highest paycheck.
No, I mean, I'm joking though, because I do have some cool opportunities to do more. Hannah and I are working on some stuff together again, the director of Long Dumb Road. And I wrote a book called Field Notes from Dimension X that I'm currently in development, making that into a cartoon. And these things take so long that it's such a hard question to answer. And then you have new ideas pop up. I guess for me, I feel like my highest and best use is writing, and directing too, but writing especially. So the more time I can spend writing prose or scripts, I feel like I'm like, that's where I should be. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. How did the Room 104 project come about? I know you wrote that one episode for Room 104 with the Duplass brothers.
Yeah, Mark Duplass just reached out to me when he was putting the show together and asked if I wanted to write one of the scripts. And he had an idea for like an illegal animal salesman. And I pitched him this other idea that I'd been wanting to write for a long time, about like a cult member meeting like essentially like a cult priest in a hotel room. So he liked the idea. So then I just wrote that for them. And it was simple as that, really.
So how does that work logistically when someone calls you, like Mark, who has this series and it's HBO, it's on HBO, so it's reputable. There's money there. You do have lawyers, you have agents that negotiate with Mark or his people. Is it a handshake deal? Do you get a back end as a writer? I'm trying to figure out, again, going back to the black box of what is happening for writers in Hollywood and in television. Tell us about the logistics as much as you're comfortable sharing.
It's usually like you go into, like, everything is like, yeah, we want, like, that's probably not the best example because that was unusual. I would say like a better example is like for instance, the first thing I ever sold, I wrote this book called Saguaro, and I sold it to HBO for development and to, become a TV show, which unfortunately, or who, maybe it's not unfortunate, but it didn't become a TV show. But the way that worked was I pitched it to them. My producers on it had a relationship with HBO, and HBO said, yeah, we want it. So I was like, yeah. I didn't know what that meant at the time. I was like, okay, I got a TV show, great. But it meant more that I got a pilot deal. And then your lawyer and or agent will negotiate with the network until they get you like the proper credit, the proper payment, which is, is on a sliding scale, which at the beginning, you get paid like the minimum, though HBO pays better than the minimum. And then you get your credit, which is like always, you always end up in EP, but like here's something that I that's like kind of behind the scenes that I feel comfortable telling a story about, is like when we were in negotiations on that, I had no money, I had no credits, I had never done anything legitimate. And my managers called me and were like, hey, they don't want to give you an executive producer credit. They want to give you a co-executive producer credit. And that's not fair. So we might have to walk. And I'm thinking like, yeah, right. Like they can call me the janitor, like just make sure I get the check. You know what I mean? And I'm like, I was super stressed about it. And then they called me like a few days later and were like, hey, your lawyer talked to them, you got the EP credit. And I was like, okay, great. But then that kept happening to my friends on shows, the exact same pattern, like where it was like, oh, they're only going to give you co-EP. And then it was like, oh, actually you get the EP credit. So I think everyone knows that a show creator will get that executive producer credit, but there's always this dance on the way there that makes it seem like there's this big battle raging behind the scenes, when really it's just like, it's kind of a foregone conclusion what's going to happen. And it just is, I don't know, it exists to make the writers sometimes, I think, feel like there's this huge battle going on when the reality is there's not, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it made me feel good, because when my friend called me and was like, they're trying to make me a co-EP on my show, this is bullshit. And I was like, I think it might just be a little dance going on behind the scenes that is irrelevant to your life. Like, let it play out for a week. And she's like, okay, yeah, they fixed it. I'm like, okay, I think this happens a lot.
It's like all the studio executives got together in a seminar or something. They're like, all right, we need to make the writers feel as marginalized and irrelevant as possible. We're going to tell them they don't get the executive producer credit, and then we're going to wait, and then they're going to feel like they won if we give it to them at the end. Some type of weird, psychological warfare.
Happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because, I mean, everything is a negotiation. Like, like if you have X amount of dollars, you can't call, and you're hiring a writer, you can't call and say, hey, I have X, because their agent's going to say, well, I need X plus Y. So what you have to do is call them and say, the only money we have is X minus Y. And then when their agent calls and says, actually, we're going to need X plus Y, you go, okay, fine. But it's like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That's great.
Though I do think there is real negotiation that happens. A lot of times it's sort of not real, but
yeah.
It's like if you watch Shark Tank, it's all the same kind of thing.
Do you feel like there is a certain point, and maybe you've reached it, maybe you haven't, where the hustle stops, where you can kind of take a breath, kind of be at the Mike Judge level in your career, and or maybe it's a hustle for Mike too. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think if you want to like change what you're doing, like I definitely feel established as a television writer now, but if I wanted to be a feature writer or make a horror movie or something outside of the box I'm in, then it would be a hustle. I do want to make a horror movie, so I think I'm going to have to hustle.
Yeah. Well, it's a great time to make horror movies. There's a lot of great ones out there, and I think hopefully that means there's a lot of producers willing to fund them.
It's a weird genre because it's like weirdly doesn't require a star in the same way. It's almost like the terror is the star of the movie. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know Jason Blum kind of turned it into just a juggernaut of, a business that, in terms of indie horror, that we didn't see before.
Yeah, like when you think about it, even Get Out is all character actors. I mean, since then, I think the lead has become a star, but not he wasn't a star when they made that movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that Jason Blum just remade, or is in the process of remaking with Keith Thomas, I believe, Firestarter. So his indie house street cred has now turned into big studio remakes, and so I think we're going to see some fun things happening in the horror genre in the next few years.
Yeah, I think so. A24 has been making a lot of good horror as well.
Nice. Well, I'll have to keep an eye out for your work in the horror genre of films, and I'm going to be paying attention to your career from here forward, because Some of Our Stallions is just a remarkable film, really special, and I'm really glad that it made it to all streaming platforms.
Well, thanks a lot, Brian, and I really I'm really grateful that you articulated those things that you noticed in the movie. It makes me really happy.
Absolutely, yeah. It's an honor to be able to comment on it and talk to you about your creative process and hear your story. So, thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian.
Hey, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, I have a favor to ask. Can you go to wherever you listen to podcasts and leave me a review? Your feedback is what keeps this podcast going. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook with the handle @DreamPathPod. And as always, go find your dream path.